Hello again, I'm Brian Keene, and welcome back to Secret Histories. In this bootleg video series, we sit on the floor in my office here at home, and we go through my books in the order that they were written and published, and we talk about that process. We talk about each book and what went into it, and its place in my history and our genre's history. Today's video is about a gathering of crows, and this is a book that marks the end of phase 2 of my career as a writer. If you've been watching this video series since the beginning, phase 1 would be typified by me starting out writing for publication and slowly selling short stories and nonfiction to small amateur markets and then bigger markets. Phase 1 culminates with the publication of No Rest for the Wicked and 4x4. Phase 2 begins with the publication of The Rising, and ends with this book, and everything that in between was the height of my success. And we've talked about all that at length. But as you know, everything was about to crash and burn. America is in the midst of a financial recession. My marriage is crumbling. Horror, which had been resurrected from the ashes by my generation of writers, is once again starting to fade in popularity and crash. The midlist, the venerable midlist, which is something that writers relied on for decades and decades to make a living, is about to be destroyed, never to return again. It's about to be destroyed by myself and Brian Smith and J.F. Gonzalez and Mary Sangiovanni, and it started out just us, and by the time we were done, it was all the Western writers, all the romance writers, most of the horror writers, most of the sci-fi writers, and that led to the prominence and rise of indie publishing, replacing the midlist. Now, all that has been talked about at length and written about at length by people other than myself and myself. I would refer you to my 2 short story collections, Trigger Warnings and Unsafe Spaces, if you want to read about it at length. Everything was changing. Everything was falling apart. At this point, Delirium Books was gone. Still had my mass market publisher, Leisure Books. So many successes with Leisure Books. Out came A Gathering of Crows. Now, I don't have any records to back this up, but I was told by several people at Leisure Books that this would have hit the bestseller list and may have outdone The Rising. Unfortunately, the book was only out for 2 weeks when everything fell apart with Leisure, and the boycott began, and the Dorchester War began. And again, I would refer you to Trigger Warnings and Unsafe Spaces. It's not that I am hesitant to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about it. But I already talked about it once this week elsewhere. And honestly, to recap all of that here, this is going to end up being like a 2-hour video. And this video is not about that. It's about this novel. So, I'm not passing the buck. I'm just saying I've written about it at length. If you're curious to learn all the specifics, go to those sources. Gathering of Crows was in stores for 2 weeks. Walmart, Target, Books A Million, Borders, all the usual places, the grocery store, and then it was gone. Until Pressure, this was my final mainstream novel. And it would be a number of years before Pressure would be written and come out. So yeah, end of an era indeed. I am fond of this novel. I had a lot of fun writing it, despite all the traumatic shit happening in my personal life. This novel was a joy to write. I feel like Levi finally comes into his own with this book. Ghostwalk sort of introduces the character, but this is the book where you really see what he's capable of. There's a lot of Labyrinth mythos stuff going on in this book, and not just, the stuff like Meeble and his servants and Levi's trip through the labyrinth at the end. There's a lot of subtle Easter eggs. Readers didn't recognize it at the time, but this is the book that introduces some of the seven and that concept. When Levi is leading everyone on that shortcut through the labyrinth, he thinks he sees Nelson Lahorn and a few other people. The character of Donnie in this book was based on the father of a kid who my kid was friends with. He'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Donnie also ties in very heavily to Donald Bloom, the character Donald Bloom. Is it Donnie? Yeah, it's Donnie. Donnie's the character in this. Bloom, of course, one of the seven, and has appeared in other things, short stories and such. So a lot of Labyrinth mythos here. But as always, I tried to keep it subtle and in the background. But yeah, super proud of this book. It's funny that Phase 2 begins with The Rising and ends with this book, and here's what I'll explain about that. We've talked about The Rising and how I was working on it, and Robert Kirkman was working on the first issue of Walking Dead, and Danny Boyle was working on 28 Days Later, and even though these were done independently of one another, they had a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same touchstones. They each featured a woman of color in a very prominent protagonist role. They both featured elements of law enforcement or the military, the people in charge, going bad. It goes on and on. The parent-child conflict, etc. Again, people much smarter and articulate than me have written about those things at length. But we saw it happen again with A Gathering of Crows. Stephen King's Under the Dome, The Simpsons movie, and Gathering of Crows all came out fairly close to each other. And all of them featured, this invisible force field that suddenly appears around a town. I believe it is in Under the Dome. Steve has an airplane hit it. In Gathering of Crows, I have a carload full of drunken teenagers hit it. I've never seen the Simpsons movie, so I don't know how they do it in the Simpsons movie. But, one of those zeitgeist things, one of those Alan Moore idea space things that we have talked about at length in the Rising video, and I've written about elsewhere, most recently in my newsletter on Substack. But yeah, it's sort of a full circle thing creatively. So yeah, this edition was out for 2 weeks. Then it got pulled from bookstores. Eventually it ended up remaindered. You could get it at half-price books and places like that. One of the rarest of my mass market books, believe it or not. It was also published. Oh, we should point out, never got paid for it, other than the advance. The advance was for, if I remember correctly, it wasn't Darkness on the Edge. No, okay, yeah. The next advance was Castaways in Urban Gothic. So it would have been this and the next book. But the next book was Entombed, that's right. So I got the advance for Gathering of Crows, but never saw a royalty statement, never saw the second part of that advance, never got paid. This was the Sci-Fi Book Club edition that Leisure granted the rights out to. I never got paid. I never even got copies. We've talked about how I have 3 copies of everything I've ever written on my shelf. I had to buy my copies on eBay because I never got copies. Indeed, it was years before I even saw a copy of this. I didn't think they'd actually been produced until somebody brought me one at a signing and said, will you sign this for me? German edition. I did get paid for that, thanks to my friends at Festa Verlag. But it was years, several years, before another edition would come out. Once everything was done with Leisure and I had the rights back to my backlist, I allowed 2 new editions. The first one was Thunderstorm Books. Did this beautiful, beautiful limited edition. 260 copies. This was 2010. Russ Dickerson did the art. Zach McKean did the stamp. There's Russ's art there. Thunderstorm Books also did a lettered edition. What I like here is how the feathers, the crow feathers, almost look like knives, don't they? Very cool effect. Let's just go ahead and take this out of the case. Make it easier to film. Look at those end papers, and I know it won't come through on video, but these are what they call cloth end papers. They're so thick and so soft to the touch. Just gorgeous, like all of Thunderstorm's books. Just absolutely gorgeous. 15 copies of the lettered edition. I also let Deadite Press, who picked up most of my backlist, do their version. Now, in one of the videos, I can't remember which one, I think it might have been the Dark Hollow video, we talked about how my older readers did not like the Deadite Press covers. However, it's important to note that those Deadite Press covers appealed to a new reader group, a new reader demographic, millennials. People like authors who you're reading now, like Wesley Southard and Stephen Kazanowski and Wiley Young. They liked my old Leisure books, but they loved these Deadite editions. And you know, the Deadite covers were always hit or miss with me. There were some that I really loved. Dark Hollow, Dead Sea, Alan Clark's covers for the Rising series. There were others that, yeah, I never really cared for. Darkness on the Edge of Town comes to mind. Entombed, which we haven't gotten to yet, but we will. This one, honestly, I'm ambivalent about. I think it advertises the book as extreme horror, and the book is not extreme horror. It's mainstream horror. It's folk horror, if anything. But you know, I was happy with it because you know, unlike Leisure, Deadite was actually paying me. I'm glad that we're done with this phase of my career. Starting with Darkness on the Edge of Town, through Unhappy Endings, Castaways, Urban Gothic, the Lahorn's Hollow Omnibus, The Cage, Scratch, Clickers 3, and particularly The Girl in the Glider and Leader of the Band. It has been getting more and more dire. It has been getting darker and darker. It was hard to relive some of these things. It was hard to talk about some of these things, particularly Girl in the Glider, and that Clickers 3 book. But I'm in a much better mood talking about this one. I'm at peace talking about this one. What you need to know is that when this implodes and my life implodes, it's going to be a year before I publish anything again. It was the first time in my career that had ever happened. A year goes by before there's a new Brian Keene book coming out. And we're going to talk about that and why that happened and what that did to our industry, what that did to our audience, and more in our next few videos. Coming up, we have The Rising Deliverance, A Conspiracy of One, Alone, and Entombed. And we'll be talking about all those very, very soon. Thanks for watching. Phase 3 begins with our next video. Peace.